the Inward Investing Podcast. I'm Mike Ritter.
And I'm Todd Whelan.
And today we have an extra special guest. Our show is built on four main pillars of life, and one of those are goals, another relationships, your environment, and your health. So every guest that we ask to be a part of this, I consider exceptional in at least one of those areas, if not all four. And we have had a couple shows recently on keto. I've done a handful of experiments myself with the keto. It's something that I've seen have a huge impact on people with certain conditions like epileptic seizures. Dominic D'Agostino right here in our backyard in Tampa is doing some amazing research on cancer therapies. We're even seeing some performance benefits in some sports. So I thought, I should reach out more in my community with people who I think are smarter than me, more experienced than me in this area, and talk about their experience. And another person right here in our backyard is Danny Vega. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's good to be here.
Yeah, you bet. And so Todd introduced me to a couple people online that were doing the carnivore diet. One of them, the name is escaping me right now. It's a carnivore doctor.
Dr. Baker?
There he is. There it is. I knew he'd do it. So,
he's a good dude.
Good dude. And he publishes his blood work. He's a beast.
Oh, or maybe Dr. Saladino publishes his blood work.
Whichever one publishes their blood work.
Yep.
Is the one we started following a little bit. And, he's out to prove to the world that this can be a healthy way of life. He's an absolute beast. A very, very strong dude. Publishes a lot of videos of him on the assault bike, smashing wattage. And so you see a lot of athletic benefit with this. You see some rumblings of people doing this successfully. And so that led me, if you use the Facebook, you start clicking on people related to them.
Yeah, rabbit hole.
Yeah, down the rabbit hole. You came up and found out that you actually live right here in our backyard in Brandon, where I used to live.
Oh, nice. Yeah, and we're right next door to each other because I'm at MI40 all the time.
Right next door. And so we found out here at Tampa Movement Lab that a while back ago that we live in this nice little panacea where it's us, the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu facility, which is another world-class training system.
I actually train at Gracie Brandon.
Really?
Yeah. So if I wanted to come here, I can come here. It's just one of those things that you gotta have respect, and you can't do it often if you do. So I'm kind of waiting for those times when I really need to train, and so I can call on that, because people let you train at other gyms, but it's kind of one of those things that's like, don't do it too much or you're gonna have to go over there. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Now the place you train over here, MI40. Little did I know, when we started working here, we took over this facility. It was CrossFit Hyde Park at the time. It's still CrossFit Hyde Park, but the overall gym name has changed to Tampa Movement Lab to incorporate a lot of different movement practices. I knew about Gracie, and I saw MI40 on the front of that gym over there, but I never really knew what a gold mine it is. And, And Ben, the owner over there, is another world-class guy. Yeah,
man, he really is. When it comes to building muscle, I think, this is my personal opinion, I think Ben's the smartest guy in the world, to be honest. Like, if you just spend some time with him, he really knows how to take these concepts and break it down and coach people. His coaching cues are amazing. So I've learned a ton, man. And this is coming from someone who's been training for 25 plus years. Obviously I've changed the way I train, because I used to be much more focused on moving efficiently, generating as much power as possible, where now it's the complete opposite. I'm trying to be as inefficient as possible. So I'm training more like a bodybuilder now, but I feel great because I'm not pushing all this heavy weight, so my joints feel good, and I look good, I feel good, and I think it's a good combination with keto.
So we'll get to that in a minute. How did you get to know Ben?
So that's good. You asked me that before we recorded, and we said we'd save it for this. So it's really interesting story. So let's first back up to 2005, 2006, when I was in Gainesville. I was getting my master's at University of Florida in physiology. And I was working with University of Florida men's football. I worked there for 8 months as an intern. And then this whole time, I'm trying to just establish myself. I found myself somehow the head personal trainer for rec sports at University of Florida.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, so that was fun. I got to redesign the personal trainer handbook, and there was a guy that used to be one of my trainers. His name was Joe Bennett, And Joe is a good friend. And in 2014, Joe came to Tampa and he texted me. He's like, hey, man, I'm opening a gym with my friend Ben Pekulski. It's called MI40. You should come check it out. And I was training at Powerhouse downtown at the time. I was in the middle of prepping for powerlifting meets, and I never went, you know, and I was just like, I didn't have time for it. And then fast forward to like 2018, either 2017 winter, Ben texted me, or he DM'd me on Instagram. He said, hey, Danny, how you doing, man? This is Ben Pekulski. I see you doing some big things in the keto space. I want you to just come check out the gym. And I was like, okay. And so I came and I had a free week here and I trained, and Ben wasn't here once, which is kind of a normal thing for him. He goes back and forth. And so I did that. I never got to see him or meet him. But then he just randomly texted me. I don't know how we exchanged numbers at one point. And he texted me. He said, hey, we're doing legs tomorrow. You want to come train? And I couldn't come. I had an engagement. So I said, no, man, I can't. And so he texted me the next day. He's like, hey, we're training tomorrow. You want to come? And I'm like, I'm never going to say no again. So
I just persistent.
Yeah. So I came and I trained with him. And then we hit it off, man. And we just became good friends. And then again, really good timing. Derek Lunsford came from Indiana to start training and preparing for the Olympia. And then all of a sudden it was me, Ben, and Derek. And we were just 3 training partners and just having some awesome conversations in between sets. And then we started to figure out, Ben was doing keto, and we were like trying to figure out how to train properly on a ketogenic diet to build muscle, because that question had been asked, can you build muscle? No one was really figuring out how to build muscle on a ketogenic diet. And
obviously looking at you, the answer is no.
Yeah, of course. I'm gone. All my muscle's gone. My gains have disappeared. And so we found some really interesting things. We made some mistakes, and then by August, September of last year, we kind of had it figured out, and we're like, we really got to make this into a program. And now we made it into a program, and now people are doing really well with it. And so Ben and I have become best friends. Our families are always together. Like whenever he's in town, our families are together. We'll go have dinner with them. We'll go, do mountain biking with them. We'll do a bunch of stuff with them. Our kids and their kids are close friends. So that's one of my best friends, man. Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, that's awesome that it happened that quick. And you just kept yourself open to the opportunity.
Yeah, I've been really lucky, man. My whole life I've just been really, really blessed to meet a lot of the people that could help me, not only teach me certain things, but just put me in the right places, introduce me to the right people. And people are always asking, how do you build your following? How do you do this? And of course, for me, I think there were some key things. Obviously, my background in strength and conditioning, being that I was a collegiate strength and conditioning coach. I was the head strength coach for VCU basketball. And I had left the strength and conditioning space for years. And then I reconnected with everybody. So I started to go on different podcasts. So I wasn't just being pigeonholed into this keto community that's growing, but it's still kind of small. And I think, every time I was asked to go on a podcast, I said yes. I actually learned that from Sean Stevenson when we had him on our podcast. We were just like, man, I'm so grateful for you to be here. Thank you for taking the time. And he was like, listen, I'll never say no to a podcast. Like that's when you really get to meet new audiences and cross-pollinate. And I think that, with the fact that I put out a lot of educational content, is what helps me grow this platform to where it is now.
Yeah, it's good that you say that. I mean, starting our show was really scary for me because it is a time commitment.
Oh, yeah.
And you're a podcast host yourself. You just mentioned that the Fat Fueled family, right?
Yep.
And I know that it's a little scary for me, but one thing that really inspired me was, number one, I got to know Ben House a little bit, Dr. Ben House.
Yeah.
I saw him speak. I hired him for a couple consultations just because I would say if I were to have a superpower, it wouldn't be super strength. It's just I'm abnormally curious.
That's me too.
Yeah, to the point where I bought sessions from the guy. I bought sessions from just to quiz him because you respect people's time. And if somebody could spend a little time with me and talk, I would take it. If they needed to be paid for it, I would pay for it. That's fine. But I feel like you learn the most through conversation, number one. But then I also found out that many people, especially people that you just mentioned, people at the top of their field, got there through having those conversations, and they're much more accessible than you think.
Yeah, man. And when you talk to somebody who's really passionate about something and dedicates their life to that, the chances of them saying no to talking about that and teaching someone are very, very low. You know, unless you're actually going to try to get over on someone or use them for something, they're going to be very accessible. They're going to let you do stuff. And I'm kind of the same way. Like when I went to University of Florida, I was a cane growing up. You know, I grew up in Miami. I'm not a cane anymore. I don't like the canes. Because I actually interviewed for a job there, and it was terrible. It was a bad experience.
Just ruined the magic.
Yeah, it totally did. But when I showed up to UF, I didn't know anybody, you know, and I just was like, I knew what I wanted to do, and I just went to the weight room. And I asked the head strength coach, I was like, look, you know, I just want to learn. I'll be a fly on the wall. I'll mop. I'll do anything. And the guy at the time who was the head strength coach was Rob Glass, and he's like, sure. So I was like, wow, I'm here. That's it. I'm here. And then he got fired 2 weeks later, and I was terrified because
coaching change.
Yeah. That's when oh my gosh, what's his name came?
Urban. Was it Urban?
Yeah, that's when Urban came, and Urban brought Coach Mickey. Now I'm blanking out on everybody's name. Mariotti, Coach Mariotti. And when he came, I was terrified because he was this short little guy, but just a freaking ball of energy, and really intense guy. And he was a head strength coach at 25, which not a lot of people can say that, man.
Wow.
He was the head strength coach at Cincinnati at 25 years old, and thankfully he let me stay. And when he first met me, he was like, what do you go by? And I said, well, Danny, you know, you could call me Danny. He called me Daniel for 5 months. He's like, and then finally, like when he started calling me Coach Danny, then I knew I made it, you know. And then eight months into it, he said, hey, there's a position opening up in the basketball facility. Not only will you be able to design programs for men's and women's golf and men's and women's tennis, you'll be helping with basketball, you'll be getting paid, but you can't come back to the football facility if you go. And I said, sure, I'm all over it. And that's how I got involved with UF basketball. That's how, when we won the national championship, Coach Grant got the job at VCU, and he took me with him. And the rest is history.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's one of those things. It's like you just put yourself out there a little bit, take a risk, and what's the worst that can happen? They say no.
Yeah. The only experience I have relating to that on the show, at least, was asking Dr. Mike T. Nelson.
Oh yeah,
to be on the show, and I've developed a really good relationship with him. But he said, yeah, right away. And as a matter of fact, I think I actually interviewed him for a book project, and nice. I said, you know, do you mind if I use this interview for a podcast? I'm thinking about starting one. It was prior to even starting it. And he said, definitely start it. Yes, you can use it. Call me if you need me again.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah. And that guy's about as busy as you get. So you got into the strength and conditioning world. You have your master's degree. You're all into, you know, the what's the word I'm looking for? The traditional strength and conditioning. Fast forward a couple of years, now you're carnivore.
Yep.
Tell me how you got to this point as far as diet. Like, how did you get introduced to the idea of maybe going keto? What were the stages, and then how did you get introduced? What was that process like?
So it's a pretty involved process, because for me to get to where I was to keto, it was very weird. I was like, keto. I was paleo in 2011, and I was doing CrossFit at the time, and you know, I went like 3 years hardcore where because I'm just very competitive, and like 2013 was my last open, and man, I trained hard, man. I was training twice a day. Sometimes I was like lean. I was like at 205, and as hard as I worked, man, that open in the Southeast, I ended up like number 1 something. And there was no way that I was going to get in the top 50. And so I was like, man, I'm sick of this. So I started powerlifting. And the powerlifting days, I kind of strayed away from paleo, and I started to do like carb cycling, and I was eating high carb, and I got really, really strong. And I got really, really beat up too, you know, between the training and I think, you know, maybe too high carb. And then in 2015, I didn't know that I had torn my meniscus already. I did it prepping for a meet, and I felt it. Yeah. APF raw. When you go raw in APF, you don't even wear knee sleeves. So that was kind of an adjustment. And then finally, my last meet in 2015, I hit a 1700 total. I deadlifted 700. I squatted 610 raw, and I hit 400 bench. And I was in pain, man. I didn't even take my third squat attempt. And then fast forward to 2016, is when I was prepping for another meet in March, and I got an MRI finally. I was like, this is too much. Sure enough, torn meniscus, a bunch of other stuff. And so I said, let me get healthy, so let me lose some weight. I was probably like 240 at the time. And I had a friend who's a bodybuilder, and he put me on a bodybuilding diet, low fat, started with the carbs kind of high, brought the carbs low. Towards the end there, in May of 2016, I was binging like every single weekend because I would get like a cheat day. And it started to like carry into the week, like my wife and I would be at 10 o'clock at night on a Sunday binging, like,
Going to town.
Yeah, there was no space for the food that we were eating. Like we had eaten all weekend, and I'm like, man, this something's got to give.
Just watching the clock and eating till midnight.
Yeah, dude. And I had a friend, Trevor White, who was a grad assistant at University of Tampa, who was working with Dr. Jacob Wilson and Dr. Ryan Lowry.
Oh wow, yeah, so that was some of the main keto researchers.
Yeah, and now
right
they're really,
Poland.
really good friends. I mean, Ryan and I, Ryan and I texted each other this weekend just to say we love each other. Like that's a good friend of mine. And so he's like, why don't you try this keto? Try keto. And I was like, that's absurd. He's like, look at these keto pancakes. Look at all these keto recipes. Try this out. And finally, when I had got to a point where I was really, really lean, and I was like, you know what? I'm where I need to be. What's the worst that can happen? So I tried keto in June of 2016, and I knew that my training was going to suffer. I kind of had done some research, and so the first week I didn't train at all, and the second week I kind of did a deload week. So it was still week 3 was when I started to train, and I felt flat. I didn't have any vascularity. I didn't really have a keto flu because I was low fat and low carb before. So all I did was add fat, and the carbs were already low. So I felt amazing instantly. And so those whole first couple of months, it was just trying to get my bearings, trying to figure out how I was going to train and keep my muscle on, which I did. I think what's really important to that is keeping your protein high at first. And then a year later, in August of 2017, I had started to hear about this carnivore thing. My friend had 2 guests on his podcast that were really instrumental for me, Ambro Hearn and Dr. Georgia Eid, who are 2 carnivore veterans. And Dr. Georgia Eid is a psychiatrist for Harvard, so her angle is mental health. And I showed it to my wife. We were going on a trip to Puerto Rico. She listened to the 2 podcasts, and she joined me on that trip to Puerto Rico. She lost like 3 pounds over the weekend, and my wife's already really lean. And I just felt even better than I did with keto. But there are some downfalls, and there are some roadblocks for both of those diets. I'm happy to talk about them. Yep. But I've been mostly carnivore since 2017. I do have times when I eat plants, and it's mostly for enjoyment or as a supplement to fuel my workouts.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, just expand on like that, what you're saying, like the pitfalls and stuff, because a lot of people, like you said, the keto flu, people will hit that and then like, oh, I can't do this anymore or anything like that. But since you're already low carb, you missed that. But then, like, what are some of the things that you've noticed, like, since you've been carnivore and stuff like that, that have really challenged you?
Yeah, so the first thing that I'll say is the keto flu. You got to really be aware of that and what the keto flu is. And I'm going to take a page out of my friend Dr. Jordan Joy, his book, because he says we need to stop calling it the keto flu. He says we need to call it carb withdrawal, because it is.
That's what it is, basically.
It is a carb withdrawal, but then there also is part of that withdrawal is the fact that your insulin drops significantly when you start a ketogenic diet. So when insulin drops, it signals your kidneys to start excreting fluid. Unfortunately, our bodies are not smart, and it's just you're not just peeing out water, you're peeing out electrolytes that are very, very important. There's been 2 studies that have been done, one with potassium, one with magnesium. Both of them showed that in the first 28 days, that both of those vital electrolytes are very depleted in the first month. So at least in the first month, you got to be really diligent with that. What I notice is with the people that start a ketogenic diet and they're not very active, they'll get these calf cramps in the middle of the night, and they'll get all these things because they're not as focused on performance as someone like me is. So they're not really diligent on their supplementation, and I have to be. So one of the most important things that you can do when you first start a ketogenic diet is there's 3 things. You got to I'll lump them into two things because really it's electrolytes and protein. So the first 3 weeks of a ketogenic diet, you have to have your protein high. At least 1 times your lean body mass. So if you're 200-pound male with 10% body fat, that's at least 180 grams of protein. Depending on your metabolic history, your activity level, the amount of lean mass you carry, you can go much higher with protein. And I always argue that low protein is a much more significant threat to your health and to your performance than high protein on a ketogenic diet. We have this diet that was created to treat diseases, it wasn't really created, but when they first realized that fasting and mimicking fasting by doing a ketogenic diet could help epilepsy, there's strong, really strict parameters there, less than 50 carbs, sometimes less than 20 carbs. You got to control for protein. Sometimes you got to have the fat really high. And that's a big difference from someone who's following this diet for performance and who wants to perform. So your protein has to be high. The other thing is your electrolytes. You got to be focusing on those electrolytes. So I always recommend magnesium glycinate because it's the best absorbed magnesium for an athlete. So at least 400 to 500 milligrams a day. You may find that you do better with even more than that. Potassium, you want to have your potassium. It's really interesting because with the typical heart association guidelines, they recommend that your potassium is double your sodium. I'm actually flipped around with that. My sodium is double my potassium. So I'm trying to get like 8 to 10 grams of sodium a day, not salt, actual sodium, and then a good 4 grams of potassium a day. You can get that from avocados. I don't really supplement potassium, but you can get that with potassium-rich foods. So those are the biggest things. Now, if you go carnivore, then you got to be even more diligent about your electrolytes. And I notice, especially in the summer, this is my third summer as a carnivore. And what I've noticed the past 2 summers is I've had to include some carbs, be more diligent with my electrolytes because between the increased activity, the heat, and just being outside a lot, I cramp even more. So, and I also have FYM6 is I think the SNP that I have. It's a polymorphism that affects you're more prone to cramping. And interestingly, the 2 things that affect that the most for me, and I learned this from my good friend Dr. Anthony J. He's a epigeneticist. He read my genes online or on a podcast with my buddy Roberts, and he told me that sleep and protein really affect that. So I'm always good with protein, but sleep is something that I've been trying to figure out for 6 months now with my Oura Ring and everything. So in those periods when I'm a little bit less sleep, I'll cramp more. So those are the main things. So I just try to tell people, like, I think with these keto and these carnivore communities, there's a lot of tribalism, which is normal. But sometimes there's like this weird ethical angle where people are like, well, if you eat carbs, you're a bad person, or if you don't eat strict carnivore, you're a bad person. And I don't really care about that at all. I care about performance, not sticking to a set of macros. I think that's kind of absurd. But yeah, those are the main things that you can focus on.
Now you mentioned the salt and potassium ratio. What does that feel like when your sodium and potassium ratios are wrong?
Oh, well, this is something that I've, in the back of my mind, wanted to research because I believe that just like with certain micronutrients, like you have to have certain amounts of levels for each one. Because, for instance, if one micronutrient is way too high, it could mess up another micronutrient. And I think the same thing happens with electrolytes. I just haven't done the work to really figure out what the optimal ratio is. But I've just found for me personally that like right around 40 to 50% of total sodium be potassium. If those are flipped around, really it's not so much that your potassium is too high. I mean, there's always a risk for hyperkalemia if you have too much potassium, which is just abnormally high potassium levels, which could lead to really bad cardiac issues. But that happening the risk of that happening is low. I think the main thing that you'll see is that your sodium is just too low. And if sodium's not high, there's a really good book by Dr. James D. Nicolantonio called The Salt Fix.
Yeah, that's a fantastic book.
Really good book. I mean, if you read that book, you'll notice like it's important for everything from sleep to performance to even sex. All these things are really driven by proper and adequate sodium intake.
Yeah, which is for the longest time, people have been trying to drive that down as low as possible.
Yeah, especially in bodybuilding. You see that a lot in bodybuilding, tilapia and you know, whatever it is, broccoli, tilapia, and low sodium. It's just like, man, you're giving yourself nothing. You're not getting any nutrition from the food you're eating. You're not even giving yourself salt. And hopefully people like Stan Efferding has done a really good job of bringing attention to that and how that's harmful.
Yeah. So going in from keto, there is a difference between keto and carnivore. And keto, there's a certain amount of carbohydrates allowed. I shouldn't say allowed, but optimal. And then you flip over to carnivore. First of all, what was your first approach to that? How big of a transition was it from keto to carnivore? And what is the main difference?
Oh yeah, there's definitely some big differences, and I'll even talk about my transition as a carnivore to kind of a different style of carnivore. So first of all, the biggest things that you'll see from transitioning to keto to carnivore, I'll talk about what I saw, and then I'll talk about what I hear. Is a lot of people do a ketogenic diet for a lot of people do it to burn fat. Like, you know, they think they're going to go on a diet, do keto, lose some weight, and that's totally possible. But you have to kind of, as you get more fat adapted, you have to look at things like added plate fat, which a lot of people will continue to add all this extra fat to their plate. I think that's good in the beginning because, number one, when you switch from carbs to fat and ketones, you're just going to be producing a lot of ketones. So you'll be in ketosis, but you'll be peeing a bunch of them out. And so what a lot of people do, they'll pee on these pee strips and they'll see they're in ketosis. It's kind of like a rite of passage when you do keto. And for me, after 3 weeks, I started to register false negatives because my ketones, I wasn't peeing them out anymore. I started to use them more efficiently, which is why it's better to do a blood test. But so after about a year, I really started to bring my fat down and I felt better. My performance was better. Now, when I started carnivore, it started interestingly as an experiment where my co-host at the time, I was doing the Ketogenic Athlete podcast. So we did that from 2016 to like March of this year. And then my co-host had some work issues. And so now we've kind of recorded like 1 or 2 episodes here and there. But he said, hey, after he had those 2 people on his podcast, he said, I think I want to do an experiment. I love salmon and I love beef. I'm just going to eat salmon and beef for a month. And I was like, okay, so let's get the parameters right. So anything from a cow and salmon. And he's like, yeah. So I did that the first month and man, I felt amazing. I had just done an experiment where I wanted to get down to 6% body fat just to say that I did it. And so I was already really lean. And with carnivore, I pushed my calories up even more and I was getting leaner. And I felt amazing.
What else are you tracking during this time?
So for most of my experiments, what I'll track is I'll track my subjective measures and objective measures. But the objective measures will be blood sugar, blood ketones, HRV, sleep quality, REM, deep sleep. What other things have I tracked? Sometimes I'll do breath ketones. And then subjective, I'll say, okay, how are my pumps feeling? How's my workouts? How's overall, all those other things. And I felt amazing. And then I did carnivore for this whole last year and a half or whatever. And then in January of this year was when Paul Saladino started really make the rounds. And I was reading his stuff and I was listening to his stuff. And he was talking about nose to tail carnivore. And I was like, wow, this makes a ton of sense. You know, like I've never thought about this idea that you can get everything that you need from an animal. And a lot of people don't really do that because in modern days, we go to the supermarket, we buy some muscle meat and we call it a day, you know? So that's when I at the time I was...
And about 3 different muscles.
That's so true, man. You know, and you know, I think that with every diet that you do, there's a potential for micronutrient deficiencies, and as long as you're aware of what those are and you address those, you're fine. But micronutrient deficiencies sometimes take months for them to appear. And so what I decided to do was be proactive about that. And so I started to eat organ meat like pretty much every day. There's some sort of organ in my diet every single day. I do eat fish roe now, lots of liver. I make my organ meat burgers, which are awesome. Even my boys love those. I'll basically take some ground beef, bacon, liver, heart, put it all together, grind it up, turn them into patties, and we'll eat that. Like we actually got a bunch done right now. And I just feel so much better. But then on top of that, right now I'm in the middle of a 3-week experiment with UCAN Superstarch. So I'm taking UCAN Superstarch pre-workout every single day. And now I'm also doing a carb up day, which I think is just the best of both worlds. You know, I'll do 4 days a week I lift, and my first 2 days are more of a traditional keto-friendly approach where I'm keeping the rest periods long, time under tension's not that much, but I'm focusing on quality every single rep. And then on day 3 is my really high volume day. That's the day that I'll eat like 225 carbs that day, which is my body weight. It's not huge. It's not a bunch of carbs, but it's enough to refill my glycogen stores, fuel some intense training, and I'm testing and all that, and my insulin sensitivity is even better. My blood sugar is really stable. My ketones are still high. So I just find that this is kind of the approach that I'm really trying to get people aware of now is if you want to do carnivore or even keto and you're training intense, then you should include some carbs for those intense sessions. You know, it just makes sense.
Yeah, we have an issue with that here sometimes with the CrossFit community. They're going keto, but then they're just working out 6 days a week.
Like and if they're doing a lot of Metcons, that's gonna crush them.
And then they just die off, and they're like, "Oh, I can't stick with this. I can't do that." And it's like, well, you need some fuel for some stuff. So that's pretty cool that you're actually including. So it's just like 1 day a week you're refueling your
and even on the interesting thing is on my so there's targeted keto, if you guys have heard of targeted keto, which is just basically consuming carbs around your workout window, which I think is probably the best approach for someone who's really active, especially someone that does CrossFit. Like I understand, like I have friends who are gym owners, and one of my friend, Mike Osuna, I don't know if you've ever met him at any of the CrossFit things, but he's an OG. Like he didn't officially start the first CrossFit in Miami, but he started the first big CrossFit in Miami. I Am CrossFit.
Is that in Fuego? Oh.
Yeah, I Am CrossFit. So all of the I Am CrossFit gyms, he has, not Wadapalooza, that's my friend Guido's event. But he has, I forget what the games are, but they're these big games in Miami. And he's like, you know, CrossFit owners are under a lot of pressure, you know, because people come in, especially the clientele that comes to his gym. They're lawyers, they're doctors, he's in a nice area. And these people are paying, you know, whatever they're paying a month for CrossFit, and they don't want to come in and do deadlifts today. You know, they're like, why am I paying you this money to do deadlifts? You know, so there's this pressure to give people like really hard Metcons. And so if you're doing like 3 or 4 or 5 Metcons a week, and your cortisol's through the roof, you have nothing to modulate that cortisol. You're taking away the carbs, which are a huge component. If you're someone who's doing that, you have some carbs before, you have some carbs after, makes a ton of sense. But if you're doing that and you're strict keto, you're gonna bottom out. You're gonna feel like crap. Your cortisol is gonna be high. You're not gonna burn as much fat. You're gonna lose muscle. You're gonna put your lean mass at risk because you're gonna be calling for all this glucose, and there's no glucose. And we create glucose through triglycerides. You know, we take the glyceride backbone. We do gluconeogenesis through that. That's how we survive on a ketogenic diet. But at a certain intensity, fat cannot keep up with those energy needs. And so what happens? You start to take protein. So you start to take your own tissue to create sugar. And that, obviously, you guys know, is very harmful. You're going to lose muscle. So
much more difficult to get it back once it's lost.
Yeah, yep.
When you're talking about supplementing with carbohydrates, what's the difference between you having, in your case, when you're in the ketogenic state, what's the difference between having sweet potatoes versus UCAN?
Yeah, that's a really good point, man, because I wouldn't even call what I'm doing targeted keto, except for my carb up day when I include some honey in my UCAN. So UCAN Superstarch is this really amazing product. I'm not involved with them financially in any way. I wanted to keep it like that so people realize I'm not just a shill. I'm not just, hawking something, as I do that with a lot of companies I work with, especially people I know that are friends. But I've known about this product since 2016, and even I had an issue with, so weird, like adding 22 carbs to my total carb count for the day because they're carbs and carbs are bad, which is just really weird, man, that you get this mental block. But I started to learn about UCAN, and it's something that doesn't occur naturally in nature anywhere. It's basically a modified non-GMO cornstarch that they take and they cook it for 40 hours. And it's now the most, basically the largest glucose molecule that you can see. It's just this huge glucose polymer that is very complex. It doesn't cause your insulin to rise, but it's still absorbed. So you're basically topping off your glycogen, but you're not risking blood sugar lows from your insulin going up. And so I've used that, and I felt that's a big difference from that and sweet potato, where it's a traditional carb that's gonna cause your blood sugar to rise and then drop. And so it's traditional carbs that burn fast. You're going to have to kind of, if you need more, you're going to have to keep that drip going. If not, you're going to hit a wall. So I love UCAN for that reason. And then on my carb day, what I'll do on a typical carb day is I always have coffee with a little bit of fat in it in the morning. That day, I may not have any fat. I drop my fat that day. At least the amount of calories that I add in carbs, I drop it in fat. So I keep calories the same. Bring my carbs up to about body weight in grams, and then I'll have my super starch with honey pre-workout. And I've really been loving a post-workout meal I've been doing white rice, because white rice cooked and cooled is awesome. It becomes a resistant starch. Yeah. So I'll usually do 4 sushi rolls because it's lean meat with fat. So usually that post-workout meal, I'll get a big bolus of meat and carbs. So it'll be like 100 grams of protein and like 120 grams of carbs, but only like 15, 16 grams of fat. And then the rest of the day, I'll break it down to 2 more meals with like some carbs. Because last year when I did this, I was only doing post-workout carbs and I had cravings the rest of the day. So if I just had some extra carbs to keep my blood sugar stable the rest of the day, I feel so much better. I wake up the next day in ketosis. I'll eat 225 carbs and I'll be in ketosis. My blood sugar will be fine. So it just goes to show that there's so many people that enter a ketogenic diet, and a lot of them that follow me, they're metabolically broken. They're insulin resistant, they're obese. And so I always have to be very, very clear who this is for, who would benefit from this. If you're someone who's really obese and has really bad insulin resistance, then adding carbs is at the moment is probably not a good idea. But if you're already getting to your goal weight and you want to improve your performance, then it makes a ton of sense.
Yeah. Well, right now, what would 2008 Danny say to 2019 Danny?
Wow, 2008 Danny, man. I wish, oh my gosh, so wait, 2019 to 2008 or 2008 to 2019?
Well, if 2019 Danny was in front of 2008 Danny, you're like, hey, dude, I'm a carnivore now. What would 2008 Danny say back?
Oh, yeah, I bet you 2008 Danny would be like, man, that's freaking cool.
So you're pretty open-minded back then, too.
Oh, yeah. I've always been open-minded, man. I think I need to know, man. I need to know what's under that rock. What is it? What's in the box? I just very, very curious, man. I'm the same. Like I joke because one of my best friends, Robert, he's like Robert Sykes. His name's Keto Savage in the keto space, and one of my best friends, and he is more like primal, just like traditional, keep it simple, work hard. And I'm kind of on the opposite end where I'm like, what's the newest thing? I want to learn about it. Half the time when I try something, it doesn't work, but that's okay with me. I learned that it doesn't work, and now I know. So, I even tell my boys this, winners don't lose, they learn. Regardless of what happens when you try something new, you learn something. That's kind of how I see it.
Yeah. I mean, Lil Wayne once said, started out pimping and ended up balling. And that sounds like the life of Danny Vega right now. So somebody else comes up to you and says, dude, you're going to have a heart attack. There's no way this could work. What's the response there? And I know there's no universal response, but I know there's somebody out there listening right now saying like, man, I don't know. Like my uncle passed away from a heart attack. I've heard all this about fat is bad. I'm sure you get some of that kickback from time to time. Like, what's that kickback like right now in 2019 when you're doing this? You have some data to back it up. You have some personal experience to back it up. How do you address those conversations?
Well, first of all, I think it's really cool that we live in an age now where people are really losing trust in the establishment. They're losing trust in like the FDA, Heart Association, a Diabetic Association. All of them are garbage. Like you go to a Publix right now, you go to any convenience store, you look at the magazine stand and you open up like these diabetic magazines and they got recipes for cakes in there. You know, it's absurd, you know.
Yeah.
There's absolutely no good science behind all of this cholesterol being bad, fat being bad. It's a lot of really poor science. So you have your, I'm forgetting the type of study where it's really, really good for trying to predict how dangerous an outbreak for some sort of virus is. But for trying to create a diet that's makes us healthy, it's just not. It's not good. It's not valid. It's not shown in anything that has actual clinical outcomes. So if it's someone who's really curious and who's truly not trying to just fight me, because if someone wants to argue with me, I'm going to say, look, go argue with yourself, because I don't have time to argue with people. I got people all the time saying, hey, so-and-so said this to me. What do I tell them? I say, tell them good. I don't know. I'm not going to argue with you. But I do have people, like I have this yesterday, I was tagged in this, some Egyptian guy or some Arab guy, like I couldn't read half the things because it was in Arabic, but he's like, posts a picture of one of his patients' blood work. He's like, look at this patient's blood work. Should we give him a statin? I see the blood work. And let me preface this. I'm not a doctor, but that's why I can say what I want, because I'm not a doctor. Right. So I'll say, look, I'll preface this with saying I'm not a doctor, but I do care about cholesterol and I do care about health. You know, it's not just about getting shredded. And so what I noticed in this one patient, the patient had an 89 HDL and a 53 triglycerides, but their LDL was through the roof and their total cholesterol was through the roof. And so should we give them a statin? Let me not even get into the many reasons why no one should be taking a statin, beyond the fact that it doesn't help anything. Like I just saw Dr. Brett Scher. He's a cardiologist out of California. Him and Dr. Nadir Ali, who's a interventional cardiologist out of Houston, who puts a ton of stents in every day. He's brilliant. They both shared some really good presentations at Low Carb Denver on not only how ineffective statins are. So they had this one meta-analysis that did a bunch of studies. They looked at a bunch of studies, and basically if you took statins for, I think it was like 20 years, you would increase your lifespan by 3 days. 3 days was the average. And forget about the quality of life, because you're going to have erectile dysfunction probably. Your chances of Alzheimer's goes up. It really messes with your brain because it brings down CoQ10. There's a bunch of stuff. But then you look at on the other side of things, there's something called the lean mass hyperresponder, which I don't know if you guys know what that is, but I would consider myself this. So a lean mass hyperresponder is something that Dave Feldman, who's an engineer, he's not even a doctor, he's doing all this research, and it's informing doctors' decisions because it's really good research. And he shows that if you're someone relatively lean, doesn't have to be shredded, even 20% body fat or less, and you notice that as you start a low carb or a ketogenic diet, what tends to happen is you'll see HDL start to increase. And this is because he's testing cholesterol regularly, which that alone gives us a bunch of information. Because when we see that if you test your cholesterol today and you test your cholesterol tomorrow, and you can have a 70-point difference, that's a huge difference. Now, what are we doing with that information? That information is telling us that cholesterol changes so much, and it kind of tells us that cholesterol is more of an indicator of energy balance than anything. Cholesterol is an energy transport system. So what you start to see with a lean mass hyperresponder as you get more fat adapted is you'll see your HDL will go up, your triglycerides will go down. If your triglycerides are under 100, your HDL is really high, above 50, 60, 70. And your insulin is low, your A1C is good, which is just the average of your blood sugar for the last 3 months or so. So if you have an A1C of like 5 or below, which is right around 90 blood sugar, you're increasing your insulin sensitivity and you're getting healthier. You may see that your leptin decreases. You may see your HOMO-IR changes. You may see your HSCRP, which is your C-reactive protein, which is an inflammatory marker. That goes way down. If you're really diligent and you order a coronary calcium score before and after you start a ketogenic diet, you notice that your coronary calcium score goes down, which is probably the best indicator of heart health, because that's telling you the plaque that's actually in your arteries right now. How occluded are your arteries and your veins, your blood vessels? So, so those things all get better. And there's this one thing there that's cholesterol, high cholesterol, and you're upset or you're concerned about that because you're told that cholesterol is supposed to be bad and it's going to lead to plaque and it's going to lead to heart issues. Even if you have a history of high cholesterol, even if you have a family with a history of high cholesterol, you can talk to the best cardiologists in the world that actually are not only treating a ton of patients, but they're science-minded, so they're doing case studies, and they'll show you thousands and thousands of cases where half of the patients have high cholesterol, half the patients have low cholesterol. Interestingly, with women, it's even more pronounced, where women do much worse with low cholesterol than high cholesterol. So actually, women who have higher cholesterol tend to live longer. And so you look at all those things and you start to realize, man, why are we giving so much credence to this one health marker? We're not looking at even like waist circumference. Like you go to a doctor's office, like, and I know people like this, you know, that they're not healthy. But they go into the doctor's office and their blood work says that they're okay. They have all types of, they have rosacea, they have autoimmune issues, they're farting all over the place. They don't feel good. But then the doctor says, oh, your cholesterol's perfect. You know, you're fine. Even if their A1C is good, because what happens if you're insulin resistant, you can have stable blood sugar for 15, 20, 30 years, maybe like 20 years before your blood sugar starts to really rise. You can already be experiencing that insulin resistance. So they send that person home. They don't worry about gut issues that this person has, autoimmune issues. And that's a big issue to me. You know, like, let's look at outcomes. Let's look at how do you look, how do you perform, do you feel good, do you have a low waist circumference, are you carrying a lot of muscle, are you carrying low body fat? That to me is more important, and it's really been very vindicating to see doctors like Dr. Sean Baker, who's, you know, what is he? He's a surgeon for orthopedic surgeon, you know, so this guy is putting people together, really smart. And he's like, I don't care about these cholesterol numbers if I got patients who are not in pain and they're feeling good. Let's go back to that, you know, like we don't have to get so complicated, you know what I mean? Yeah.
I have somebody that I know very well who has had Hashimoto's, weight gain from that. They have very elevated cholesterol numbers and triglyceride numbers. A1C is normal, glucose normal, C-reactive protein fairly normal, complete blood count fairly normal for somebody with autoimmune, like that's coming down and up with the thyroid numbers. And not once has this person been asked. We're kind of getting on a soapbox here, but I get a little.
What they eat?
This is my thing. Not once have they been asked about the fact that this person has a severe allergy to some meats.
Oh,
like exorcism style.
Oh, yeah.
And
like maybe, is it a histamine response or is it like just a sensitivity to certain?
It's never been investigated.
Yeah.
Don't know. So I'm assuming it's an enzymatic or a bacterial imbalance, something going on. Could be fungal for all I know.
Yeah.
And then the fact that if they ate a large volume of food like a salad, it looks, not to be too TMI, it looks fairly undigested coming out the other end.
Yeah, that happens to a lot of people, yeah.
And the fact that has never even been looked at. I can't tell you whether it's related, but I do know if either your diet isn't a good diet or it is a good diet and you can see there's some severe digestion issues, like you can't assimilate nutrients.
Yeah, and you could fix that with even just trying some digestive enzymes for like a month or two. Get some betaine hydrochloride in there with some good enzymes, with some bile in there. Maybe you're absorbing the food better. I just had someone, I got people DMing me all the time, and I really go out of my way to answer them. And someone yesterday was saying, listen, I just started Carnivore and I'm really, really hungry. You know, could it be that I'm not absorbing all of this food? And I said, that's a very likely thing. If you're not absorbing all the food that you're eating, your body's going to say, not enough. Keep going. Keep giving me more. You know, and the fact that healthcare providers aren't asking these questions. Now, don't get me wrong. There are some really good healthcare providers that are actually asking these questions. I have a 5-year-old with special needs, and we just found a really good guy locally here, Dr. Berger. And it took us quite some time to answer all the questions that he asked. And a lot of them had to do with lifestyle, nutrition. That's getting to root cause. That's healthcare. That's not sick care, you know? Yeah. And if there's one thing that I can really just try to impart to people is for them to really try to think about the fact that food, what you eat, is composing who you are, like your cells, you're feeding those cells with the food you eat. The cell walls are being made up of the fats that you consume. So if you're consuming hydrogenated oils, that's what your cell walls are being made up of, and so you're turning into your McDonald's, and that's why you look like crap and feel like crap. And if people could just understand that part, that would be super important, because then we would know that when something goes wrong, we don't feel hopeless, and we don't feel like we have to go to some expert who's probably not going to know anything about nutrition. We can actually, and that's, to me, one of the main reasons why we do what we do with our kids, because even if they don't do what we've shown them, what we've modeled for them, and how they've eaten their whole lives, even if they go off the rails when they grow up, they'll know that if something goes wrong, the first thing they can change is their diet, and they'll feel better. That's huge.
And you just mentioned kids. So as you have your head buried in books, you have a podcast, you're speaking at some conventions, very diligent about your own nutrition, your own sleep, your own workouts. It's clear you're good at taking care of Danny. How in the world are you managing a family life, a personal life, some kind of like spiritual, personal balance in all of this? Like, let's transition from that into, Danny at home.
Stuff.
Yeah, life stuff. How are you managing all that?
Well, I will say, man, the one thing that I've had to adjust to, and I still haven't figured it out, is I didn't talk about the fact that I did medical device sales for like 11 years. So I was in women's healthcare for this whole time. So I did everything from pelvic floor reconstruction to urinary incontinence. I was in those procedures all the time, living in the OR. Urethral bulking, stone management, IUDs, sterilization, endometrial ablation, all those things. I was doing that for years. And as a salesperson, you have this really good system that this huge corporate company is giving you to manage yourself. And when I quit my job last September 2018, I lost that, so that's been a huge adjustment for me. I'm noticing now, thank God, that I've been now finally pushed into the position where I have to say no, because it's not sustainable. I have to be better with my schedule. Sometimes I'll schedule things back to back to back to back. I'll say yes to everything, and then I'll be 5 minutes late, and then I'll be 10 minutes late, and then I have to cancel things, and that happens a lot for me. So I'm not going to pretend like I have that part figured out, but one of the things that I know I do have figured out, and it's just because I've been doing it for so long, over 7-8 years since my oldest was born, is, first of all, I'm very fortunate that my wife is on the same page as me. Everything that matters, we're on the same page, like the exact same page. And we've always wanted to raise, kids who are going to be healthy, who are going to be just men of virtue. Like when we found out we had our first one, we had a plan, like we had a nutritional plan, we had an education plan, and we could talk about that too if you want. And so, my oldest, my wife was nursing him, when it came time to add food, first thing that kid ate was raw liver and soft-boiled egg yolks. Like this kid was eating brain food. And he had a really strong paleo base that we built upon, and we did the same thing with my youngest. And so one of the things that I try to show, and only reason why I learned about this was that people started to tell me, like, you need to share about this because you take it for granted because it's so integrated into your life, but we don't know these things. We don't know these practical tips. So that's part of the things that we do with our podcast is we talk about how we do nutrition at home, how we do fitness at home, how we do education with our boys, our parenting style, mindset. How do we develop resilience in kids who live in 2019 where everything is so easy? There's no challenges in life. Everything is so convenient. And so that's one of the things that we've been focusing on forever. Like we want to make sure that we teach our kids financial responsibility. So perfect. I'll give a few examples of these things. So one example for financial is that when my son was 2, we took him to Disney for the first time. And, you exit through the gift shop every single time. So this kid was like having a huge meltdown because he wanted a toy at the gift shop. So we took him outside. We sat him right on the bench, and we held him while he cried for like an hour. And we were like, you know what? I know it sucks. You can't have this right now. But that's how life works. you need money to buy things. But you know what? We're gonna make sure this never happens again. We're gonna start giving you jobs at home so that you can earn some money and you'll never have to deal with this again. As long as you save your money and you buy the things you want to buy, you have the power. And so it took him like 4 months to earn like $30, and went back to Disney that one time. We filmed him too, because this kid was like, he was confident, man. He walked into that store with his money and he paid for it. And, you know, obviously my wife and I are like, oh my God, he's so cute. You know, like, and he's like, whatever, guys, whatever, this is normal. You know, I'm cool, you know, whatever. What are you guys talking about? And so we do that with everything. And we take every single opportunity that we get to have conversations about things that matter. And we have those conversations. We ask them questions. We use the Socratic method a ton with our boys. And so all of this stuff, the only way that it could work is there's knowledge and there's applied knowledge. And so knowledge is kind of worthless unless you're just sharing it with people. Okay, it doesn't matter if you're not applying it to yourself, you're going to ruin your health, but at least you can help other people. But when it comes to your kids, they got to apply this knowledge, you know? So you got to make this into a practical thing. You got to just take it from the abstract of the idea and make it work in real life. And that goes for everything from education. So we tell him, you need to understand, like, if you were in school right now, you would be waking up early in the morning, getting on a bus or whatever, us taking to school, and you'd be sitting down all day. But you don't sit down all day. You never even sit all day. Like, you're moving all day, and you're studying and you're learning about the things that you love. Because for us, we homeschool our boys, and we don't just homeschool, we unschool them. So we don't even have a curriculum. We're very much child-led learning, and so our boys are very independent. And so all of these things, they just kind of integrate themselves into our lives. So I don't know if that answered the original question. We were talking about the boys, but they eat a paleo keto diet. They eat a lot of meat. We start everything with meat, and we have these little wins, man. We have perfect example. Yesterday, we went the Cub Scouts, because that's another thing that I do with them is Cub Scouts, because it gives them life skills. It helps them build confidence. It helps them take care of the environment. There's just so many good skills that you build with Cub Scouts. Like yesterday, we went to the Rays game, and my son was selling newspapers. So now he's going up to people and he's saying, excuse me, would you like to buy a newspaper for $2? And he's real confident about it. And, you know, kids nowadays, they're online all the time. They're playing video games. They don't even know how to act with a person, let alone an adult, which is sad. But we went to the game, and they didn't let us bring food in. So now we had to buy food there. So I'm like, okay, let me go take care of this. So I go to the concessions and spend $56 on 2 burgers, no bread with cheese, and 2 hot dogs, no bread with cheese. And since I paid $12 for each burger, I'm like, screw it. I'm going to eat the fries, even though I'm going to let them eat the fries, even though I hate fries, because it's potatoes with vegetable oil. So I wouldn't mind if it was just potatoes, but potatoes fried in vegetable oil never occurred ever in history of mankind. But I took a picture because they both ate their burger and their hot dog, and the hot dog was a big old hot dog. And then they left their fries. Like, they may have had like 2 or 3 or 4 fries. And then like I put it on the ground, the tray, when they were done. And I'm like, I took a picture because it was like no meat there and all the fries. And we have these wins, and these things are encouraging to us. Like, they'll eat, I make the organ meat burgers. The other day I made Desmond an organ meat burger for breakfast with badass paleo pancake with honey and butter. He doesn't touch the paleo pancake. He crushes the organ meat burger. He asks for another one. He eats the second organ meat burger, and then he doesn't even eat the paleo pancake, you know? And then I'm like, okay, well, I don't want to waste this. So I leave it there on the counter. And then like 6 o'clock in the afternoon, no one's eating it. So I'm like, screw it, I'm going to throw it away. And we have these wins, you know, like, and it's really important to keep their autonomy. So like, we don't force them to eat something, but at the same time, like if we're at the store, my 5-year-old is a little bit more difficult because he doesn't understand as much. I can't have these conversations. He wants the candy. So he'll say, because we always tell him, it's your body. You do whatever you want with your body. We're never going to tell you what to do. So he's like, can I have these Kinder eggs when we're at the Publix? And he's like, and I'm like, no. And he's like, it's my body. I'm like, yeah, but it's my money. You know, you can buy yourself crap, but I'm not going to buy it. And that's another thing we do is like, if you want to buy yourself, a PlayStation or a video game, I'm not going to contribute to that because I know how damaging screens can be to kids and how addictive they are. But go ahead if you want to save that money. Go ahead. I know my freaking dad and my mom and my mother-in-law are going to spoil you and give you money every chance you get. If you save it, eventually you'll be able to get one, you know?
Yeah, it's awesome. So kind of another side note. I know you said you were at Publix. Where do you shop for your food?
Okay.
Do you order
really
something
good.
or anything? Or?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question because I, as much as possible, focus on local sourced foods, real food, packaged food as little as possible. And so my local guy is Oliver Heritage Farms, John from Oliver Heritage Farms. I used to go to his farm to get my meat from him and get duck eggs and all types of cool stuff. Like this weekend, I got some lamb bacon, which I never had before. Freaking delicious.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's really good, man. Lamb bacon's really good. I eat all types of
I've been so hungry this entire time. Like, I'm trying to hold it back, but oh my god.
Yeah, it's only gonna get worse.
Oh,
maybe
next time we gotta cater this.
Maybe I'll help you because I'm about to talk about organs and stuff. Maybe that'll turn you off and kind of balance it out. So I get a lot of stuff from him. I get bones I'll scoop out the marrow, I'll eat the bones after I roast them. Then I'll put them in a crock pot and I'll make bone broth. I get all types of broth from him, liver. But then I also, I like to eat wild as much as possible. So I'll get a lot of wild game meat. So last year I took my first buck. I had a bunch of meat from that. I also get antelope, a heart, venison liver, venison heart, bison, boar tenderloin, a bunch of stuff from a company called Broken Arrow Ranch. So Broken Arrow, I think it's Broken Arrow Meats on Instagram. They're fantastic. I get sometimes I'll buy like 10 to 20 pounds at a time of grass-fed liver from Rain Crow Ranch. Laura's Lean is my number one meat company because I absolutely love them. No hormones, no artificial ingredients, obviously, grass-fed, and I'm an ambassador for them. So they send me meat every month. They fly me out to conferences. I engage with the audience with them. Really grateful for them. They're an amazing company. I still get Butcher Box, even though because I have a really good deal with them. I'm just not promoting Butcher Box as much because Laura's Lean is the people. I want people to eat Laura's Lean. And then there's a new company called Nose to Tail, which is awesome. They'll do like ground beef mixes with spleen and all types of organs in it. And I love the weird stuff. Like I'll eat brain. Sometimes I'll mix it into my family's food. I try to get them to try as much stuff as possible. Sometimes my wife gets mad because sometimes I won't tell her. Like the other day I put brain in her ground beef and she's like, "Why did you do this?" And I was like, "Because it's not bad." And she's like, "Well, you're right. It's not bad, but whatever. You didn't even tell me, you know?" And I was like, "Well, look, if I told you, you wouldn't try it, you know." And that's the problem. Like, if we have such a disconnect between the source of our food and this modern society that we live in. And I'm not gonna say that if you haven't hunted that you shouldn't eat meat, but I think if you're someone who eats a lot of meat, you should try to hunt at least once so you could really appreciate what it feels like to take an animal's life, process that animal, and then bring it to your plate. You respect it so much more. It tastes better. Like when I killed that buck, I processed it and was eating it within 2 hours. There's nothing like that, you know? And, you know,
it's work.
It's work. You're right. It's work. Hunters are the best environmentalists because they understand this ecosystem that we live in. We can't take too much. We have to respect the animal, be grateful to the animal. But death is a part of all of this, you know? And things are going to die whether you are vegan or whether you're a carnivore. You may be surprised to know that, like, it may be worse with veganism because you're getting stuff flown in from all over the world, and that's using petroleum. And then you're taking lands, for instance, that are probably arable lands. They probably should be using that for forage for the cows to eat, but we're irrigating that and we're destroying the topsoil all over the world. And of course, we have so much money in this country and our dollars so respected around the world that we can go and we can just destroy other lands and then we can fly it over here. And then, you know, Sally Vegan gets to eat her vegetables all year round And, instead of when they're in season, and, that's my soapbox now.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is a whole nother. So to put a bow on that, Diana Rogers was a guest on the podcast.
Oh, she's great.
I had her on a few episodes ago. She's making a documentary called Sacred Cow, her and Rob Wolf.
Yes. It's about sustainable
agriculture and this whole issue with veganism being the solution to the environment and all of the holes in that problem, and how regenerative agriculture ends up being a much better process. And I'm totally on board with everything you just said, like understanding the fact that everything eats and is eaten.
Yep. We just take turns.
Just part of it. And that, I've actually coached people on a vegan diet or a plant-based diet. And if you're doing it for health reasons, or you choose to do it, I don't try not to shy people away from that, just like, a carnivore approach. But there has to be an understanding that it's not a solution to the world's problems.
Yep.
And it's probably not as environmental friendly as it's been sold.
Yep.
But if somebody has questions or wants to dive into that, there's a book called Stuffed and Starved, covers it really, really well. And Sacred Cow is a documentary coming out with Diana Rogers putting it together and Rob Wolf, and they're both co-authoring a book together on the same subject. So if anybody wants to know more about that,
can I add one?
Please.
I would recommend also The Vegetarian Myth by Leah Keith. 20-year vegan, and she goes into everything from the health side to the sustainability side. I just learned so much from her. And this is really interesting for me because she's a hardcore social justice person, very, very, just the opposite of what I am. But I appreciated her candor and her honesty so much. And she's gotten death threats from vegans. Like, these people get angry,
Very.
But yeah, it's been very enlightening. And I hate that it has to be adversarial. I wish that we could just talk about ideas and exchange them. But for some reason with nutrition, it becomes this religious fanaticism. People are obsessed with what other people are putting into their bodies. Even me, like if I eat something that's not carnivore, someone's like, "Hey, Danny, you're not carnivore anymore?" I'm like, I don't know. Ask the authorities. Who do we need to ask that I'm still carnivore? Am I? Let's ask. I don't know.
Yeah. It gets very tribalistic, very almost church-like.
Yeah. Same thing with carnivores who are dogmatic, just like vegans are. Like we're saying, the vegans are dogmatic, and a lot of carnivores can be that way too.
Yeah. Man, I think we exhausted the subject pretty good. Yeah. Do you have any other questions, Todd?
No, he answered them. What do you use? Because I hate tracking my food. I like eating food. So, you're talking very specific numbers and everything. So I'm sure you track your food, or used to, but don't anymore. So what do you use, or how do you go about that? Or if someone's like, "Oh, I want to try carnivore," and they're like, "Okay, eat this much," and they're like, "Oh, well, I'm not tracking my food." Like, what do you?
Yes. Okay. So if you're someone, and I tell people this all the time, like if you're someone who just wants to either switch from a regular diet to carnivore or a ketogenic diet to carnivore, the first thing I say is like, look, why don't you just try to figure out the food first? Try to figure that out. Don't worry about portions or anything. Just start by eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner of meat. What do you like? Do you like ground beef? Do you like eggs? Do you like ribeye? Eat as much as that as you want, and however full you get. And some people still say, well, I need a number. I'm like, okay, well, if this one girl that I told the other day, I was like, well, just eat 8 ounces of meat 3 times a day. If that's too little, add another 2-3 ounces each meal and go from there. Now, for me, I'm really OCD and I love to track, and my wife makes fun of me. She's like, you're gonna be 90 years old tracking how many ounces of meat you're eating. And I wish I could get away from it, man. At some point, maybe I will, but it's a weakness for me. Like, I love to track. I've been using MyFitnessPal since 2010 or 2011. So I have like years and years of like weight data and a bunch of cool data. Like I see what I ate like in 2013 on a Thursday, So I use MyFitnessPal, the Pro Edition. I also use MyFitnessPal when I'm making meal plans sometimes, because I'll be like, okay, how many ounces of, let's say 4 ounces of ground lamb, how much protein and fat is in that? And I could see the verified inputs, and then I can actually use that to help myself make a meal plan. Even though now with Ben and with our web guy, he's really helped me automate that a lot. So now when people sign up for meal plans, it generates a meal plan based on my foods or what macro calculator I'm doing, and it gives it to me, and then I just look at it before I give it to them. So yeah.
That's cool.
That's awesome. Man, so I guess, where do people find you? If somebody's interested in learning more about this from you, where do they find you?
So I'm most active on Instagram. So at Danny Vega M.S, Masters of Science. That's people ask me what's the MS. And on Facebook, same thing. Danny
More
Vega.
spleen.
More spleen. Let's go. I love it. And our website is fatfueled.family. So www.fatfueled.family. You'll see our podcast there, our digital products, coaching, articles, free articles, stuff like that. That's about it. Facebook and Instagram. We have our Fat Fueled Family YouTube. We'll post on there occasionally. We have a bunch of followers, but we barely post stuff because it's, again, the time thing. Everybody wants to record a video. Nobody wants to edit a video.
Yeah. No joke. Yeah, you're talking to the king here. Like I have this video here, and it's going to take me, I don't know how long to get it done, but it's all worth it in the end. It's just a struggle.
Yep.
I almost forgot. So we have a traditional question at the end of every show. There's no right or wrong answer to this, but it's more of a survey.
Yeah.
People who I consider successful people across the board, or at least people who are curious-minded, tracking, doing well in all 4 pillars. Do you have any morning or evening rituals with your family that you have kind of like found works best? Anything you get in a groove to start your day or end your day with your family?
Absolutely, man. So my wife and I both wake up way early. So I'll wake up at like 4:30 or 5, depending. My wife will wake up like maybe 5:30. Both of us, since I wake up earlier, I go make the coffee for her. I warm up the sauna because we have a sauna at home. And I start every single day with 20 minutes of meditation in the sauna. So I'm hitting 2 birds with 1 stone. I want to do my sauna daily. Sauna has immense benefits for cardiovascular outcomes, brain health, just everything. It's just a real nice hormetic stressor to start the day with. And it's a nice pairing with meditation because I can feel my heart rate starting to climb as I start to sweat. And then I'm battling that by breathing and by belly breathing and just being in the moment. And so always meditation. Then I'll do my my just daily routine. I'll read my daily stoic. I'll have my morning coffee. My son will wake up at 6:30, and so my son at 6:30 has to, as soon as he wakes up, he makes his bed and he cleans his room so that we never have to clean your room. Like, it's always clean. And then right after that, we'll go and we'll walk around the block. And when we're walking around the block, he'll be telling me what he wants to spend the day doing. I want to know how he wants to, what are intentions for the day, what he wants to work on, what he wants to learn. A lot of the time it's being patient with his little brother, stuff like that. We'll do a workout. So I'll have him do, he just got pull-ups for the first time. So he's doing 2-3 pull-ups in a row. And that was like 3-4 month progression of jumping, pull-ups, negatives, all those things. And he'll do push-ups and squats. And so he's starting his day every single morning knowing that he's got to get moving. And then as soon as we finish that, which takes about 20 minutes, we'll do our devotional together, our daily devotional. And then he starts to do his reading because he's working on reading. Homeschool kids, a lot of the time, they'll start reading later than other kids because we're just not preoccupied with these random benchmarks that say you have to read at a certain age, because in reality a lot of these kids that are reading at 5, they're not really reading, they're just memorizing. Like, if you ask them what does that word mean, they don't even know, you know. So he does a lot of his reading, and then at 7:30 or so we're done with our morning routine, and I send them off with my wife. They have stuff all day. They have STEAM, science, technology, engineering, art, and math. They have really good homeschool co-ops here. My youngest is doing swimming now, so he'll do swimming at 9:30. And then in the afternoon, every single day at 4:30, we leave to jiu-jitsu as a family. And so my youngest goes at 5, my oldest goes at 5:30 to 6:15, and then we go home. When we go home, we eat dinner. We ask them the 2 same questions every day. We ask them, you know, what did you do well today, and how did you fail? And those are really good because I remember, like, when we first started doing that, like a few years ago or a year and a half ago, it was so hard for them to say anything that they failed at. No, everything went great. I'm like, oh man, really? You didn't fail? Okay, maybe tomorrow you'll fail. You know, so we really want them to embrace this failure so they can just try new things and be confident to make mistakes. Sometimes I'll do meditation at night. I wish I was better about that. I know that I would benefit if I did it more. And that's about it, man. I mean, pretty much my morning routine is really, really good. My evening routine could be better. There's certain things that I know that I'm not doing that I would like to do, but I just haven't worked them in yet. So, yeah.
That's amazing, man. You guys are everything I want to be as a family. That's like, I just realized how much I'm failing as a father. I think I identify wholeheartedly with everything you're saying. As a father, I'm trying to do the same things, and we have our approach with our kids isn't so much to tell them what to do, is to lead them to the right area, teach them, not just give them rules, but teach them how to have an on and off switch, financials, food, and lead them into areas where they could fail and learn from it, and that helps teach the on and off switch on their own. So I commend you, man. You're on the right track. I really appreciate it. I hope you come back on the show at some point.
Absolutely,
I'm gonna follow up with you
anytime, bro.
Absolutely. Yeah. Cool. Well, this has been the Inward Investing Podcast. I'm Mike Ritter.
And I'm Todd Whelan.
We'll see you next week.
See you guys.